Good evening, everybody. Welcome to all of you. I see that the number of participants is slowly climbing, and so I'd like to begin this virtual town hall for the evening of May 13th. We're really glad you're here. We appreciate that you're spending some time with us this evening. It's meant a lot to us here in Berkeley Unified that we've been able to serve as hosts to the community, to be able to share information and collect the thoughtful responses of parents, guardians, students, and our staff. Although we can't come together, being able to have these virtual reunions has been very meaningful to us. So thank you very much for joining us. At this evening's town hall, we plan to focus very heavily on the topic of the fall of 2020. For previous town hall convenings and for many of our presentations to the Board of Education, we've taken on a range of emergency issues that have included school closures, the creation of a distance learning plan, and then many of the ancillary efforts to support our students and families through things like technology distribution, meal distribution, and other efforts. Increasingly, however, the media is beginning to report on the fall of 2020 as a topic of great concern, and it's been naturally a topic of among administrators, educators, and parents as we look to August, and all of us together wonder what August will bring. So what we hope to be able to do today in Town Hall is offer our best thinking about the potential features of a fall start. To do that, we plan to talk a little bit about the planning process that we've constructed over the last week and a half or so, that we hope will bring together a broad variety of stakeholders to offer feedback about the fall. So we'll share with you the engagement strategies that we're employing now through the next month and a half or so, that we hope will lead us to a tentative provisional plan that we can also rest on for now. Just before the summer comes, and that we can pull off the shelf as we get closer to the beginning of the school year and modify as it's needed. We'll also describe for you a number of the tracks that we plan to follow in the planning process. And by tracks, I mean the steps that we'll follow to be able to engage constituent groups, ask lots of questions, and get a sense of the important topics that we'll need to plan for. Very particularly tonight, we plan to share with you a draft document that describes potential risk reduction practices in our schools in the fall, if we're permitted to open up our school facilities. We'll also share with you some preliminary estimates of the reduced facilities and bus capacities that we may experience in the event that we can reopen our schools. Just like our last town hall, we plan to use a platform that's called Thought Exchange. Thought Exchange is an online platform that enables participants in virtual meetings like this one to comment on a survey question and to view the comments of other participants, to offer ratings on those comments. And then we'll be able to see both comments and ratings live in real time. And then we'll take a number of questions as they emerge from that live online commenting and rating. In addition, we plan to offer you an update on distance learning as it exists right now through the fourth quarter of this year. We plan a second thought exchange activity on the topic of distance learning. So again, we're picking up what we think will be two key themes about the fall. One, how will we use our school facilities if we're permitted to? And two, given that we think we'll be engaged in ongoing distance learning, what do you think of it now? What's been your experience and what should we focus on as we look to improve distance learning in the fall of 2020? I'm joined this evening by a number of colleagues and school board members. I'd like to point out to folks who are listening in that we have a number of school board members who are in our audience this evening. So thank you, school board members, for joining us. Although I wasn't able to see the complete list of participants, I do know that Board President Judy Appel is in the audience, as is Julie Sinai. So thank you very much for being here. We're also joined this evening by Natasha Beery, who's the director of the Berkeley School Excellence Program, or BSEP. She also serves as the director of community relations, and importantly, she's been serving as the district's liaison to both the county and city health departments. We're joined as well by John Calise, who's the executive director of BUSD's facilities department. And my name is Brent Stevens. I'm the superintendent of Berkeley Unified School District. So to launch right in, I'd like to begin just to describe briefly some of the engagement strategies that we have now begun to employ to reach out into the full Berkeley unified community, both educators, parents and guardians, and students, to understand the range of concerns that are presenting themselves as we talk about the fall of 2020. We'll also then talk about some of the content that we will plan in anticipation of opening for the fall of 2020. It's really important to state at this moment, May 13th, that we're currently operating without any comprehensive guidance from the state, the county, or really even the federal government as it relates to reopening schools. There have been a broad variety of organizations that have offered their thinking, and that thinking is very helpful to us, but there's no definitive map for what school reopening should look like in August of 2020. What we do feel confident is saying is that COVID-19 will continue to be in our community, continue to be in the state and in the nation, and that school will be impacted by the presence of the virus. We do believe that school will not be back to normal in the fall, and that will very likely carry forward elements of both social distancing and distance learning into that reopening. Though there's no definitive guidance for school districts at this point about how to reopen schools in August, there are a broad variety of documents that we've been reading very closely and that we're leaning on to provide some insight about the fall. They include most critically an April 14th document issued by the governor of California, Gavin Newsom, which he called his roadmap to modifying the stay-at-home order. Importantly, that roadmap includes 6 indicators, one of which is the ability of public schools to implement social distancing conventions as we begin to reopen. Since that roadmap document, there's been a number of additional updates that include an important document issued by the San Diego County Office of Education, which doesn't have any authority, but does offer a lot of smart insights about the types of decisions that school districts will have to confront. And then most recently on the 11th, just this week, the Alameda County Public Health Department issued guidance for all organizations that offer camps and other educational and recreational programs this summer. And so we do have some sense from that document about what they will require of those organizations to maintain public health. And in as much as that serves as a tip for what the fall may look like, it's helpful to us as well. We're facing just a broad number of questions that together as a community we'll have to try to ask and answer. Among these important questions include the idea that there will be health practices that we must ensure that are in place in all of our schools in the event that we can return to our school campuses. We'll talk a great deal about those health practices in tonight's town hall and ask you a number of questions that assume that those health practices are in place. We also have to ask ourselves what physical modifications to classroom and common spaces will be required, as well as thinking about the revised capacity of all of our schools, given that social distancing is probably not possible when all students and staff are present at the same time. By revised capacity, I mean literally how many students can fit in a classroom, in a hallway, in a cafeteria, on a playground, so that we can also maintain social distancing. We also need to think about school scheduling and building use. If we begin to diminish the number of students who can be on our campuses at any given time, we'll then naturally have to think about the way we use our buildings and the way we schedule our days and weeks and months. And we want to, of course, think about those schedules in ways that will maximize student learning, engagement, and well-being, as well as accommodating a broad range of family needs. And then finally, I think that we'll have to discuss as well a blend of both on-campus learning and distance learning. Again, that blend sort of serving to the greatest advantage of students and families. In terms of how we are contemplating engaging the Berkeley community in all of these questions, I'd like to describe for you a few of the new structures that we've implemented just over the course of the last week or so. We are planning to be in sort of a nested set of engagement activities This represents a large lift for many staff members to begin to engage deeply both inside and outside of the school district. One of those structures will include a cross-departmental lead planning team devoted exclusively to the topic of fall 2020. We also will be working very closely with our school principals as we have through the course of this crisis, but increasingly we'll be engaging our principals on a week-by-week basis in fall planning. Those principals will play lead roles in generating feedback, reviewing materials, and we'll ask them to turn around and lead very similar conversations in each of their school communities, both with school leadership teams and with their complete faculty groups. We will plan to deeply include educators at a number of levels of our engagement strategies to get the best thinking we can from all of our employees, teachers, and classified folks alike. We've also begun a set of new advisory committees. Those two committees met this week on Monday and Tuesday. One of those advisory committees is open to educators from the district. We had almost 90 educators join me and other members of the staff on Monday afternoon. And then almost 35 parents and guardians joined us for a community advisory committee on Tuesday afternoon. We'll continue to make regular updates to the school board. We've been doing this as a matter of practice over the last several months. We'll continue to do that, and this is another excellent way for members of the community to get additional ongoing information about the efforts of the district to contemplate the fall reopening. And then, of course, we plan to continue to partner with our unions. That includes our certificated union and our classified union, as well as those organizations representing our administrators and our classified management. So all of these structures are meant to communicate one with the other, again, drawing what we hope will draw forward excellent thinking from all of our employees about options available to us for the fall. In addition to all of these new engagement structures, we will continue to commit to open and transparent communication and soliciting feedback from the full Berkeley community through events like this one, virtual town halls. We're planning a town hall to take place exclusively in Spanish on May 28th, a student town hall in which we'll be inviting our own students to comment on their own experiences of the last quarter and their aspirations for the opening in the fall. We'll as well plan on a collaborative town hall to be co-hosted with an organization that's called the Parents of Children of African Descent, or PCAD. This is a long-standing parent advocacy group here in Berkeley. That town hall meeting is scheduled for May 26th. In addition, I'm planning to begin to host all staff webinars with the superintendent. Those will take place on Thursdays at noon, and all of our roughly 1,300 BUSD employees are welcome to attend to hear from me directly updates about the reopening of schools in fall. We as well will continue to use online technology like Thought Exchange to solicit ideas from students and families. And we've been in the midst of relatively large-scale surveying of students, staff, and families through the use of Google surveys. Most recently, we were able to collect about 2,600 student responses from students in grades 6 through 12. We're busy analyzing those results. And last Friday, we closed off a survey for families and guardians, which netted about 2,000 responses. Again, we're in the midst of analyzing that data. And then last, a critical element of our engagement work centers on the liaisons who are part of the Office of Family Equity and Engagement. These are the good folks who work very directly in sort of hand-to-hand relationships with families. And we rely on them a great deal to understand more nuanced ways that the COVID-19 crisis is impacting our families. 2 weeks ago, we hosted a town hall. This took place on April 29th. This is a sort of quick representation of some of the large amount of feedback that we netted. It was really quite a remarkable level of participation from community members. At that town hall, we had about 350 folks join us. We had over 1,000 people respond to our last Thought Exchange survey. About 4,500 responses were tendered, and about 46,000 ratings meetings. This word cloud represents some of the key themes that came from all of that online interaction. You can see some of the large font words indicating where the community is sort of feeling, I think, the most emotional energy. That has to do with the mental and emotional well-being of students. That has to do with increasing opportunities for students to feel connected. And it has to do with increasing opportunities for interaction, which we believe is both interaction between students and between students and their teachers. In terms of the sequence of topics that we're imagining that we'll have to sort of unpack and put back together as a community, we have contemplated a number of tracks or steps. First in these tracks or steps is that we must define strong risk reduction practices in the event that we can reopen our school campuses in August. And by risk reduction practices, I mean a well-defined set of social distancing and hygiene conventions that will minimize the risk of infection in the event that our schools reopen. We also know that we'll have to recalculate the capacities both of our schools and our school buses. In order to maintain social distancing, we simply can't have the same number of people on our campuses at the same time. So this evening, we plan to focus on the risk reduction practices. We'll also be focusing on the revised building and transportation capacities. And at that point, very shortly, I'll be inviting my colleagues, Natasha Beery and John Calise, to make brief presentations. And we'll use the Thought Exchange platform to ask for your views on these two topics. After that, we will have essentially defined some guardrails or some parameters for the remainder of our planning. I see the next pivotal step in our planning will be to define on and off campus options for reopening schools. And by that, I mean, how shall we use our facilities and in what way will we combine limited facility access with ongoing distance learning? Critical to all of this planning, I imagine, will be conversations about student learning, our goals for student learning in the coming year, about student engagement and how we keep that engagement strong over the course of what will likely be a very bumpy year, and about student connection in keeping with one of the themes identified in our last town hall. A fourth track that we'll have to explore has to do with the provision of additional childcare opportunities, both for parents and our employees with children. We're hearing loud and clear the stress that many families are feeling because school, which represents a critical form of childcare, is now no longer open. And for working families, the lack of available childcare, in addition to the fear of learning loss, is creating a great strain. So in addition to thinking about reopening our classrooms and combining it with distance learning, we imagine that we'll have to give serious consideration to the expansion of school day and after school childcare options for parents who simply are not able to be at home. All of this will then lead to serious consideration of increased staff training, both about health protocols and about distance learning. And then finally, we'll have some, I think, difficult policy conversations at the Board of Education level about temporary alterations likely to last throughout the duration of the 2021 school year that will impact important topics like employees working from home, like grading, and like attendance. So what we'll do now is turn to two colleagues, Natasha Beery and John Calise, and what they'll do is walk you through one of two documents. First, Natasha Beery, again, who's our Director of Community Relations. She also serves as the district's liaison to the City and County Health Department. She'll walk us through a draft set of risk reduction practices to be implemented in the event that our campuses open. And shortly after that, John Calise, Executive Director of Facilities, will walk us through our draft projections about revised capacities related to schools and school buses. So with that, I'd like to turn this over now to Natasha Beery. She'll walk us through several slides about risk reduction practices for the fall in 2020.
Thank you, Superintendent Stevens. So in this next slide, you're going to see just very briefly a few of the sources of information that were referred to earlier that guide us as we do our best to determine the best practices for school reopening and facilities use. So first of all, we're guided by the shelter-in-place orders. And as you all know, the 6 Bay Area counties and the city of Berkeley together collaborate on that. And those orders may in fact be stricter at times than what the state orders. The state orders are summarized below. They include the indicators that were mentioned earlier about when we might be able to reopen, what needs to be in place. And we've bolded there the portion that applies to us, which has to do with the ability of schools to support physical distancing. And as Superintendent Stevens mentioned, we recently received guidance from the Alameda County Department of Public Health, which guidance applies, while it applies to summer camps and educational programs for the current time, which are only open to children of essential workers or for some specified vulnerable populations. Some of that guidance is, we think, applicable to what we'll be thinking about going forward to the fall. So in the next slide, you'll see a list of some of those considerations. So these are both the ones that have come out from the CDC and from state and local guidance. One of the first considerations has to do with a factor that I imagine you're all familiar with by now, which is the 6-foot distance. And that 6-foot distance is one of the variables then that we pass along to our colleague, John Calise, Executive Director of Facilities, to use in his calculations to determine how many students might be able to go into a classroom or use a hallway or a bathroom. And then similarly, another factor that we need to use for calculations has to do with guidance around keeping kids in bubbles, if you will. So having small cohorts, there's both a guidance for 12 being a maximum, in some stricter cases 10, as a stable number to choose to keep children in, along with one adult caregiver to lessen the amount of contacts and also facilitate tracing. And then there are some practical factors, such as the need to clean between cohorts. So if we're thinking about different ways of using our facilities, whether it's different days or different times of days, we need to factor in the fact that if new kids are coming in, we have to allow for cleaning, and that takes time. We're all now familiar with the idea of high-touch equipment, such as playgrounds, and those unfortunately might continue to need to be closed off, or we need to attend to additional cleaning. We have other elements that are frequently used, books, for example, and we need to be thinking about what gets passed out and how we clean in between. A number of countries that are ahead of us on the curve, the pandemic curve. So countries in Europe, countries in Asia, some of them are now beginning to open up in some modified ways. And they're incorporating things like the 6-foot distance, but they're also incorporating in some cases various kinds of screening. So temperature taking is one possibility. Some are going so far as requiring testing, whether for adults or for children. Hand washing, as we know, before the pandemic was important, and it will clearly continue to be for a very, very long time, if not forever. Hand washing means building in additional facilities and additional time for hand washing, additional supplies. Face coverings, we're all required to wear at this time, and we can imagine that that could be likely in the fall, at least for certain age groups, and there are implications for how that would be rolled out and supported. And then another factor that actually came up in the thought exchange, as I recall last time, was thinking about using our facilities differently and considering the possibility of having more outdoor time. So all of those are factors that we can put into our planning as we think about if we are going to go back to campus, how we might use the campus. And then on the next slide, just a few more factors. If we're going to put these practices in place, we need to be sure that there is some shared understanding and agreement with our labor partners, with our teachers, with our other staff who might be on campus, to be sure that everyone is on board with these practices. And families need to be on board as well, and participating, for example, in self-screening, making sure that they're not sending sick kids to school. And we need to take into account that our kids and our staff all come with differences, and some of those differences may mean that they will need some special considerations. There may be some students who may need to stay in the distance learning context, even when it may be safe for some of their peers to go back. Some of them may need some additional support. Same goes for staff. There may be particular situations for an individual staff member or something about their work that may require some adaptations to reduce the risk of transmission and support their health. And there are some adults who may, like students, have risk factors that mean they may not be able to come back to school right away or back to work right away. And we also have a line there about mental health. Obviously, that's important for everybody, but it's a line that we added in there as well, as the stresses of whether working remotely or on campus is something we want to attend to. And then I believe the next slide goes to Mr. Calise.
Thank you very much. So good evening. So what we've done in facilities is we've begun to look at our physical capacities of spaces. And what that is not necessarily is how we're running the classrooms, but just about how many students we can fit on the spaces. If we go into the next slide, what we'll see is we started looking at our capacity for each grade level based on the class size. And this is just an average right now. This is based off of an average size classroom of 960 square feet. We are beginning to dive deeper into that minutia to get calculations across the board for all of our classrooms. But what that shows is that at the K-5 level, we can fit about 50% of capacity of our students at any given time. At grades 6 to 8, where we jump to 28 to 1, we're looking at a 40% capacity. And then at grades 9 to 12, although it's still a 28 to 1, there are many classrooms on the high school campus that we recognize are considerably smaller than the 960 square feet. So we're at about a 32% capacity is our best thinking right now. Hallways, while we can certainly calculate the maximum number of people that you can have in a hallway, what you can't really account for is the movement. So recognizing what this must sound like, especially for the upper grades, but the only way to really control the hallways would be single file direction up and down each side. Now with that, there are other things that can be considered, such as staggered passing periods, changing how we do passing periods, etc., and that is forthcoming. Cafeterias and other common spaces. Cafeteria seating at our K-8 level anyway would be reduced and limited down to about 31% of current capacity. And what that translates to is at about 5 students per table, where you would traditionally seat 16 students in order to maintain distancing. And then we would also have to maintain social distancing and 6-foot spacing for the lineup. The bathroom capacities would be reduced to about 50%, with waiting having to occur in the hallways. Playgrounds, yards, and gardens. The yards and gardens, we estimate we can hold about 50% of normal capacity. Per the current health order, playgrounds will likely remain closed as of now. Identifying additional space for instruction within schools, we're also looking at multi-purpose rooms, cafeterias, gymnasiums, all of our common areas to see how many students we could actually fit in each of those while maintaining social distancing, just to offer those up as environments for teaching and learning as well. We are also working to identify additional space for the district. Right now, we're considering the possible use of the adult school for the K-12 program, possibly scheduling BAS use for evenings only, maybe moving BAS to more of an online platform, and considering the BAS may be used for school day childcare as well. So if we move to the next slide, what we'll look at is our transportation capacities. Our transportation, a good number of our buses are 78 and 72 passenger buses. And then we run a lot of the smaller buses as well, which range from 16 to 24 passengers. What we've found is based upon our bus capacity, we can actually the maximum number of students that we could transport during a single run with all buses would be 174 students. So of the 852 students that normally participate in the morning run, that number would be reduced down to 20%. There are 189 students for the midday, the pre-KK run. That would be, we can maintain 92% on that. And then it looks like we lost a line there, but we currently run 1,008 students for the afternoon run. And we would only be able to run that at 32% capacity. Additionally, looking at, additionally, looking at facilities cleanings and best practices, I apologize, it was 17% capacity, I'm sorry. Looking at facilities cleaning and best practices, we are looking at some different models to actually begin to expedite cleaning. One of those is that we're strongly considering is the use of electrostatic cleaning. Electrostatic cleaning does have a cleaner that provides to kill COVID. And what we could do is actually disinfect an entire classroom in about 8 minutes. And then that classroom is safe to use within 10 minutes following that. This would be in conjunction with some traditional cleaning methods, and same with bathrooms. While we would definitely have to maintain our traditional cleaning methods there as well, we are considering the use of electrostatic cleaning in there as well, and we're just doing a little more research to make sure that that's the right tool for that. So with that, I think I will be passing it over to Dr. Stevens.
Yes. Mr. Cleese, thank you very much. I appreciate that. So we've arrived at a moment in our town hall where we'd like to sort of turn the proceedings over to you. We have discovered a platform that's called Thought Exchange. Thought Exchange is essentially a survey tool that will let us ask you now a survey question. We'll explain exactly how it works in some detail, but here's the question that we'll ask you to sort of respond to and consider with us. Public health guidance may require us to reduce the numbers of students in each classroom and on each campus in the fall of 2020. Given the need to reduce the number of students on school campus, what thoughts do you have about the best ways to use school facilities and transportation in the fall? So with that, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. Natasha Beery is going to give us a detailed explanation of how Thought Exchange works. So if you'll follow along with her instructions. In the meantime, I'm going to add to the chat feature the link that you can access as well, or you can use your QR code. So Ms. Beery.
Thanks very much. So for those of you who participated a couple of weeks ago, hopefully this format looks familiar, but let me walk this through you for anyone new. You have a multiple number of ways to join in to submit your suggestions as well as consider the suggestions of others. And on this screen, you see a QR code. So if you hold your phone up, and take a picture of it, you should be able to click on that image and that should take you right there. Alternatively, you can go to tejoin.com up there on the screen and then enter those series of numbers. That will get you there. And there's a third way to get there that Superintendent Stevens just mentioned, which is to go to the URL that's in the chat. Once you do that, you'll see a little screen from Thought Exchange, and it's pretty easy to get in. All you have to do is, you can first of all select your language if you'd like. The default is English, but you can select Spanish or you can ask for another language. That is in a little tab called Introduction. And then you get asked 2 more questions, who you are in terms of whether you're a staff member or a parent guardian, and the level that you're associated with school, elementary, middle, or high. Once you've done that, you can start adding your thoughts. I'm hoping everybody is getting there, and I'm hoping everybody is going to be patient with me because this is the first time I've done it alone. Last time we had somebody helping out. But what we get to do now is set a timer. So I've got this 4-minute timer. Hopefully people are starting to get in. And as you start to get in, you'll start to suggest some thoughts. So right now there are just 3 thoughts. We have, I think, 300 people, 332, good heavens, people online, which is pretty similar to what we had. It looks like 31 people have already signed in. I'm going to leave this up for another minute or 2 so that we have more people joining us. And then as you share your thoughts, we'll take a look at them. But I'm going to be quiet now for a moment while you just share your thoughts, and I'll set the timer and we will come back in a minute. So we're seeing the thoughts starting to come in, which is great. And all these little shapes here are the thoughts that people are connecting with. Please do take time to rate other people's thoughts. It's all anonymous, so feel free to give it your honest rating in terms of your stars. We just have about 1 more minute left, so do try to jump in and rate a few more thoughts. Okay, in just about 20 seconds more, and then we'll close it down and Dr. Stevens will take a look at what people are talking about. Great. Okay, well, we had 244 people participate, 260 thoughts, and a lot of ratings. And now I'm going to switch the screen over to let us see what popped up. What this does is it shows us how people on average rated a thought and how many people did. So for example, this first thought, Dr. Stevens, which I could hang on, I'm going to try and do this, double click. Okay, I'm closing the exchange. For elementary, it does seem like maybe kids need to be in cohorts, 10 kids per cohort, and go every other week or Monday, Wednesday, Friday, then Tuesday, Thursday. Keeping consistency with a cohort teacher is important, plus they need regular face time. Superintendent Stevens, do you want to respond to that?
Yeah, I'm happy to. This is sort of much on our minds as well. It's this guidance that came out from the Alameda Public Health Officer about summer programs, in which she, for the first time, is talking about this idea of a bubble group. Bubble group, again, is a limited number of students, somewhere between 10, 12, 14. In the guidance, she describes that group essentially being together for a period of about a month. And assuming no contact between one bubble group and another bubble group within the same program. So this is a relatively new concept for us. It makes a bit more sense at the elementary level where students are, by and large in one classroom. It's very difficult to conceive of how a bubble group could exist at the middle or the high school level. And then this idea about students sort of being consistent, go 1 week and then not the other, or are going sort of consecutively, to me sort of touches on the idea of needing to regularly clean our facilities. We imagine that every time a new group enters into a space, that space should be thoroughly disinfected. So while we don't have this level of detail plotted out, questions like this are the ones that we plan to begin to engage both educators and parents with as early as next week, to come up first with the most reasonable options, and then to narrow those options down to the ones that we think are best.
Thank you. And here is another one, a suggestion about a survey to determine what different families might want to do, and the fact that not all students may fit into the same plan given different risks in the family, among the family members.
Yeah, this comment makes a lot of sense. It's one thing that we do know is that there's going to be a huge amount of variation, both among our employees and among families and students, about both what they want for the coming school year, but what they're able to tolerate from a health perspective. We began to see just a little bit of this in the week or two prior to closing schools, where many families opted not to send their children to school because of their children's proximity to a high-risk family member, or because the student was him or herself at high risk of infection. So we do think that additional surveying will be necessary, not only for families, but also for staff who, of course, are in the same life circumstances as everybody else. So we agree. I think that this is an excellent idea and something that we'll need to do more of as we try to write a plan.
Mm-hmm. And we have a couple of questions that are kind of, or thoughts that are somewhat similar, which have to do with what kids are able to do without, on their own in terms of following social distancing rules. Can they really do it, and won't they need a lot of supervision?
Yes, I can only answer sort of from a personal perspective right now because we don't have district plans on any of this. Certainly the younger the child, the more difficult it is to conceive of social distancing. It might also be true though for high school students, many of whom, love a good hug in between classes, that this is just going to be very challenging. What I would hate to imagine is that we're setting up a social environment on campus in which students feel a great deal of pressure to maintain that distancing, or in which students start to tattle on one another, or where they develop hang-ups about the sort of proximity to other people. None of these scenarios that we're contemplating is good for community building. And so there's a great deal of worry that I have right now just about the capacity of kids to do this and the emotional impact of social distancing on young students. And then, of course, the supervision and teaching that would be required in order to maintain those conventions over a long period of time.
Thanks. I'm also seeing a couple of 2 or 3 that have risen to the top that are fairly, that are similarly noting equity and the fact that there are some families that really need childcare and don't have the option of keeping the kids at home and working.
Yeah, I really appreciate this comment, and appreciate as well that it was rated as highly as it was by the participants. Shortly, in just a few minutes, I'll be sharing some information with all the participants tonight about how we're doing so far with participation in distance learning. As it was my worry before we closed schools, distance learning has exacerbated a number of equity opportunity gaps, we should call them. I think the lack of childcare is also having having a disproportionate economic effect on some families. And it is true that if presence on school buildings is now a scarce commodity, we'll have to do some thinking about who has access to that commodity, who needs it, and how we might be able to sort of nice to have from must have, if it's simply a rarity to have students on our campuses for that kind of childcare.
Do you have time for one more?
Yes, I think we do have time for more.
Okay, I'm also seeing a theme here. Several questions popping up, the idea of outside being an important component.
Yeah, I think this is a really sort of interesting prospect, and one that might be for the best for kids. Right now, it seems to be true that infection rates are lower outdoors. And so we certainly could be taking advantage of many of the beautiful spaces on our school campuses for more outside instruction. The idea that students might be spending more time outside, even if that means less formal academic work, could be both good for kids from a health perspective, but good from an emotional perspective as well. So this is certainly on the table. We'll be asking our principals and teachers to begin to engage with this idea and to contemplate the way their own school campuses could support additional outside education if we're able to use our campuses next year.
Mm-hmm. I see one or two more themes. Would you like to tackle them?
Or why don't we? I think we're doing just fine on time, Natasha.
Okay, great. Then another theme that's coming up is the idea of choice, depending on families' needs.
Yes, I think this sort of touches on a previous comment about needing to survey to understand family needs. What I don't anticipate in the fall is that a one-size-fits-all model will really be appropriate under these circumstances. It may simply be the case that some families are so uncomfortable with the increased risk of sending their child to school that they opt for an entirely distance learning or independent learning experience. Others, of course, will prefer that their children get some access to the school communities that their children are missing so much right now. So we'll have to allow for some level, I think, of self-selection. The idea is that those days would be staggered, of course, is one way to achieve the conditions that we were just describing, those health practices. So all of this thinking is in front of us still, but we imagine that we'll have to have multiple options. And what I do think we can probably count on is that distance learning will be a feature of school next year, whether or not we're able to bring students onto our campuses.
Then I'm seeing another idea that's come up in phrased a couple of different ways, but let's see if I can get it to come up now. There we go. The idea that while we might want to stagger to accommodate a larger, a greater capacity, there's the issue of families and that complexity.
Yeah, this is a really smart idea. It's one I hadn't thought of, but it makes perfect sense that we would try as best we can to create as convenient a schedule as possible for our families. It makes sense.
Mm-hmm. Oh, this is a idea I haven't seen before. The idea of partnering in a health surveillance study. Interesting.
That is interesting. You know, I had one creative person today mentioned that we should reach out to UC Berkeley if they will be doing online classes to see if we can take advantage of some of their physical space, given that we may be looking for more of it. I hadn't thought that this kind of partnership might help us be sort of quicker on the draw to notice potential hotspots in our own district. It's a really interesting idea. We're sort of still in the nascent stages of speaking with the public health office about what school reopening might look like. And of course, we're going to depend a lot on the Berkeley City public health officer, and would love to depend on UC Berkeley as well for support around both health monitoring and strong health practices.
And then this is sort of here's one that's sort of a variation. We had one suggestion that had to do with, prioritizing some kids being on campus depending on their family's needs. But this one, and I see a couple of others similar to it, the idea of a hybrid model, more or less for everyone.
Yeah, this was a strong theme among the roughly 35 parents who attended Tuesday night's advisory committee meeting. Had a number of thoughtful parents sort of suggest that what might be of most value to their children isn't so much the teaching time if they're on campus, but the peer interaction time, the ability to engage in some enrichment. She was really asking, let's get clear about what the most valuable thing to children is when they get to be on campus. It may not be more teaching, but it may be some of the sort of missing elements of school that we can't provide in an online setting. So I agree that this sort of hybrid makes sense, and that we should get clear as a community about the value of being on campus to our students and what they'll most need in order to feel themselves a part of a community and to maintain motivation under these really trying circumstances.
Yes, there's another one that I passed by, but it said something similar, just really talking about how important it is for peers to see each other. Oh, here it is. Keep grade levels together. My kids want to see their friends again at school.
Yeah.
And then here's a comment asking about after-school programs. So, we've been talking about our core instructional day, but what about Learns, Jazz, Bears?
Yeah, so I think these the sort of capacity revisions will apply to all of our programs, whether it's pre-K or adult ed. Anytime we're contemplating bringing students and staff into a shared physical space, then all of the social distancing and hygiene practices along with those revised capacities will apply. I do think we have a lot of work to do to contemplate a stronger after school or extended learning design. And then part of the challenge I think we've got is to think about how our extended learning programs, which typically work in the afternoon, might also be expanded into the school day to provide additional childcare for students who can't be on campus for a particular day, but whose families are particularly strained by work requirements. So again, this is only an idea. There's not a plan yet behind it. But I do think that Learns and Bears and all of our other after-school partners will have a strong role to play in the planning for next year. And Natasha, with that, I might propose that we push on, do a little bit more presenting, and then try our second thought exchange. How does that sound?
That's great. I'll stop my share right now. There we go. And I do want to let folks know that the thought exchange will stay open. Right now I have it set to stay open as we did last time through the weekend, but we can talk about that. So people can continue to add their thoughts.
Great. Thank you, Natasha. I appreciate you facilitating that section. What I'd like to do now is offer a little bit of information, sort of emerging data about our current distance learning. It's been no secret that we've had lots of hiccups as a district, and in fact as a state and as a nation, in trying to move all of our brick and mortar instruction to an online learning environment. And we do have some interesting data to share. This is both local to Berkeley and recent data published this week about distance learning around the country. And so we'll walk through it. I would say that there's a sort of a number of themes emerging from the data that includes ongoing hardship for some families and students, issues around engagement, issues around participation, and issues around connection for students. What we're looking at here now are bar graphs that represent participation rates in week 2 and week 3 of our distance learning plan. We began our district-wide distance learning plan on April 6th, so we're looking now at the weeks of April 13th and April 20th. What we see here is that generally there was an improvement in participation, marked in orange, both in elementary, middle, and high school. We can see that middle school had the lowest rate of participation, or the highest rate of non-participation, but that all of those indicators improved over time. There's an important caveat in looking at any of this data in that we're no longer using our routine procedures to take daily attendance, but have had to jerry-rig a number of participation measures that our teachers are taking each week. And so we're not 100% confident with this data, but this snapshot, I think, within so many points, so as with a particular margin of error, gives us a good indication of the rough proportion of students who are participating in distance learning. Breaking apart this data a little bit more, here's more of what we saw in week 3. Again, that's the week of April 20th. that we were able to improve the tracking of participation by teachers from about 66% to 88%. That number will be much higher now that we're in week 6. Across the district, we had improved rates of participation. Students who were marked as not participating went from 22% in week 2 to 17% in week 3. If we disaggregate our data to look at a number of important student groups, however, the rate of non-participation is considerably higher. Among students experiencing homelessness, that rate is 40%. Among African American students, 31%. Students with individualized education plans, 30%. And students experiencing socioeconomic disadvantage, 29%. So these are all troubling statistics. They do line up with the data that's emerging from other districts and across the country, but they're troubling nonetheless. We have been watching many of our schools get incrementally better and sometimes better at a faster rate at improving student participation in distance learning. And we've been actively encouraging school leaders to compare notes about how to make the fastest strides to improving student participation. I'd like to turn now to an Education Week article that was published just on Monday of this week. This is some of the first data that we're getting that gives us a glimpse of distance learning as it's emerging across the country. Ed Week was quoting research that drew from 8 large urban districts. And what we see here is teachers' representation of changes to the way they use their work day. So in that first bar graph, it indicates that 29% of teachers are doing more student instruction, while 71% of teachers are indicating they're spending less time in instruction than compared to before school closing. In terms of presenting new materials, 31% said they were spending more time, 69% less time. You can see similar readings for enrichment materials. Generally, there's been a decline in the offering of enrichment. There's been an increase in review of older materials. And then it's this last indicator that I think is holding true for many of our teachers, and that is that there's been an 87% increase in teachers reporting that they're spending their time troubleshooting problems. And by this, the article goes on to describe that these are largely technical problems that individual students and families are experiencing. So these are all behind the scenes draws on teachers' time, which diminish ultimately the amount of time that they have available for instructing students. Here's another interesting graph again from the same Education Week article. This is comparing student engagement prior to the coronavirus closes. And then they're asking on a week-by-week basis what they're seeing engagement to be. You can see most recently that there have been increases in reports by teachers that student engagement is declining. And what I mean is essentially teachers are saying that students are becoming less engaged in distance learning over time. And we're hearing anecdotally similar reports from our teachers about students who are feeling less motivated to participate in online learning compared to sort of an initial enthusiasm that took place sooner after our school closures. Here again is another reading on student engagement. And this is asking teachers just over the last 2 weeks what's happened with students' engagement. And it's the dark blue and navy blue colors declined a lot and declined a little that sort of indicate across all of these 8 school districts what's happening with student engagement just in the last 2 weeks. Again, this roughly tracks to anecdotal reports that we're hearing from our own staff. And then here, I think troubling to all of us, reports from teachers across these school systems about students who are quote unquote truant. That means that they're simply not in contact with their teachers since schools closed. So this is a week by week reading. And you can see that the sort of roughly a quarter of all students in these 8 districts surveyed by Ed Week are not participating in distance learning. This roughly tracks to the number that we experienced in our second week of distance learning. We've made improvements and we're a little bit better than these numbers, but certainly for some subgroups, we're far higher than these averages represent. To take a look more closely at some of the challenges experienced by some of our families, the Office of Family Engagement and Equity, or OFE, has been compiling weekly reports of the activities of its liaisons who work in our elementary and high schools. They're not present in our middle schools. During the week of April 20th, those liaisons had contacts with 249 families. And in doing a uniform survey of those families, discovered that 57% of that 249 are struggling to pay rent directly as a result of COVID-19. 16% are experiencing housing insecurity, and that means worried about becoming homeless. 69% are now reporting food insecurity, and 57% reported during that week that they were having challenges accessing learning. Again, these are some of our most vulnerable families in Berkeley, families who have many assets, but who are struggling for a variety of reasons, social, economic, educational, to stay as plugged in as many of our other Berkeley students are able to. So we've now arrived at our second thought exchange activity. We wanted to present some of this data about distance learning and then ask you to reflect with us about your own experience of distance learning so far. Here's the question that we'll ask you to answer using, again, that thought exchange tool. Given the uncertainties of the COVID-19 pandemic, distance learning is likely to be a part of the plan for the fall of 2021. What are your thoughts about ways to make distance learning sustainable for students, staff, and families for a longer period of time? So with that, I'm going to unshare my screen. We'll go back to Natasha Beery, and she'll share with us once again exactly how to access the Thought Exchange link.
Okay, so here we are in the second thought exchange. I got feedback that you'd like more time to rate more thoughts, and it really is valuable to do that, so I've put more time on the clock for this one. Again, same thing, you can either look in the chat where we've dropped the URL, you can take a picture of this QR code and get there that way, or to tejoin.com and use these digits, and then go in and share a couple of your thoughts about how to make distance learning sustainable, as well as please spend a good amount of time, see if you can rate 20 or 30 thoughts. That really helps us be able to see what's rising as salient to a large group of people. And I'll give you another minute or two and wait till I see some participants joining in before I start the clock. Okay, we're about halfway through our time. If you could start rating more thoughts, that would be really helpful. Minute and a half left. If you could make sure you've rated at least 20 or 30 thoughts, that really gets us to a point where we can see what's rising. I think we're just about there. And just one more minute. Okay, we are just about out of time, and I'm going to, we'll keep the exchange open, but we're going to see what's rising to the top. Okay, here's the first thing, a suggestion of a tech support crew on call to assist families. I believe that's happening, is it not?
It is, in fact. Yeah, there have been so many sort of acts of generosity over the last 6 weeks. One of those acts has been the formation of a small team of entirely volunteer tech support providers. These are community members and parents who are volunteering their time essentially to work to respond to families' technology needs. One of the things that they've taken on is what we've termed a tech wellness check. Of the roughly 2,500 Chromebooks that we've lent out, this small team of about 30 is trying to reach out by telephone to every one of those families to check in and see how it's going. That doesn't mean that they're necessarily providing on-call support, and this is what I think this particular participant is really getting at. The idea that we would try to minimize teachers' need to provide tech support, sort of the data that we saw before, and that we would provide additional tech support so that teachers could focus more on instruction. The idea makes sense to me. We've got a little bit of it, and it might be that we need a lot more.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting seeing things sort of jump around live, because the next one I was going to call up has actually, oh, here it is, was on another topic entirely. So rather than focusing on the technical, on the, see if I can get it back up, outdoors. So sustaining all of this distance learning with a balance.
Yes, I think that this idea of additional outside time is going to appeal to lots of folks. It is fortunate that it conforms right now to sort of best thinking about how to limit the spread of this infection. We do have a lot of beautiful spaces on our campuses. We've got a lot of beautiful spaces in Berkeley as well. So this is, I think, an area that is open to exploration. And one that I would love to see our school communities begin to unravel and think about it as an integral part of the planning for the coming fall.
And let's see, I'm seeing a number of questions having to do with supporting teachers. And so this is just one example. There's another one that talks about teachers also having internet and tech problems, but here's a suggestion about equipment.
Yes, it's hard to argue with this. Many teachers reported in the opening week of the school closures that they no longer had access to the materials that they needed regularly to teach. So that included both the hardware like whiteboards and markers. It also included many of the curriculum materials that they lean on a day-to-day basis. We did this very large survey with about 650 teachers responding. That was in the very first week of school closures. Recognized that we needed to do a better job in providing access, and so have been somewhat regularly opening up our schools for teachers to get access to materials. What we haven't done, though, is be able to provide sort of the at-home setup that would make video production and online teaching sort of easier and more effective for our teachers. I don't have a strong idea about how exactly we would do that, but it makes sense to me that if distance learning is a feature of our future, that we're going to have to do some work to try and better enable it from folks' homes.
Okay, thanks. And here I've seen a couple getting to another point, which I can, there we go. More small groups. So just the challenge of trying to manage the online setting given numbers.
Yeah, this is, I wonder about this one as well. I think some of our high school teachers have become reasonably adept at providing sort of larger lecture style format, sort of in Zoom or other platforms. I talked to a couple who say that it sort of works a little bit better to do that for instruction and then follow up. I know at the younger grade levels, teachers have been struggling to pull entire classrooms together. Again, there's lots of variation across our teachers. Teachers are having different experiences and coming to prefer different technologies. This idea, though, that smaller is better, it's generally true in the real world. I think it's generally true in the online world as well. So this is, we'll share this feedback with principals and teachers. What we plan to do, just to sort of comment about all of the feedback we're collecting, is make it available to both the public and to the teams that we're asking to plan on behalf of their school communities. And then they'll turn this over as best they can, thinking about selecting from the best possible ideas for the fall.
Great. There are lots of good ideas here.
I bet there are.
So here's one, which, okay, here we go. Again, it's ways to support our teachers in this brave new world we're all in, including PD.
Yeah, this is an interesting question, Natasha. It was, I think all of our teachers felt the abruptness of our school closure and the abruptness of this, really complete transformation of our district. From one day to the next, we had closed our facilities. By the time we'd actually written the features of a very preliminary, almost emergency plan for distance learning, we had only 2 work days for professional development to try and support teachers. So that old adage about building the plane and flying it too has been absolutely true. As we go into the fall, we have a somewhat longer runway. And what I'd love to do is work with our teachers union and others to contemplate increased time for professional development and training on health practices so that we can be better equipped as a team to support students in the coming school year.
And another one about staff and teachers. Just just as students are different kinds of learners, so are teachers, and so this suggestion that people play to their strengths.
Yeah, so this is also an interesting idea and may, in fact, sort of support the notion that for some staff who are in high risk categories or who live with high risk individuals, that coming into school facilities may be a more risky proposition. Of course, we have differentiated roles in the district now. We have teachers on special assignment. We have intervention teachers. We don't typically differentiate the role of classroom teachers. And I'm reading this comment to suggest that there may be value in further differentiating the role of classroom teachers as we think about those folks who may excel in an online environment, others who may prefer to teach in the way we're all accustomed to. So I think this idea is open and in front of us. And we have some examples to draw on, but not a perfect analogy.
And sorry, I've lost my screen, but it's.
Oh no, okay.
I'll get it back. It'll just take a second. The next one that I was going to go to is similar to one that we've talked about before, which has to do with more opportunities for project-based learning. Mm-hmm. And long-term projects. Here we go. There it is.
It says focus distance learning on project-based learning with less focus on screen and online activities and more on longer-term projects. My kids have enjoyed cooking projects and learning a new skill, constructing something to then write about. This is also really interesting and sort of fun idea to play around with. Many of our teachers in their sort of classroom settings enjoyed project-based learning, enjoyed those moments when the curriculum had a bit of a break in it and students could suspend sustained time working particularly in partnership with others to do things that were outside of the printed curriculum. Given that we'll likely be living with distance learning through the duration of next year in some form or another, this idea I think is really intriguing, that some of the assigned work would cater to students' curiosity, would get them outside of the more traditional academic subject and enable them to do some things around the home and on campus that are simply different, more fun, and more engaging. So I'm all for this and think that this is an area that we should really actively explore.
And here's a variation on that. Let's see if I can get it. So this is academic, but it's using maybe things like paper instead of screens.
Yeah, I wonder sort of for a lot of our kids sort of what the mix is feeling like. I suspect when you think about that data that I shared, that's the data coming from the Ed Week article published on Monday. That Ed Week article drew from 8 large school districts. I suspect if the decline in student engagement and interest may be because of the sort of flooded feeling of too much screen time. I know for some students and families, they would welcome more. And we're hearing also reports that with more screen time comes more anxiety and comes less overall interest in the content of learning. So I do think there's value here. It's great feedback. And as we go back and begin to work with our teachers on revisions to our distance learning model, this is something to keep in mind.
I think we've hit a lot of there are awful lot of good ideas here. I also know that there are some ideas that have been dropped into the Q&A. Do you want to continue with these or do you want to go to some of the Q&A?
We can. I know a number of folks have included some questions here in the Q&A. Why don't I take a couple of them for now, Natasha? Does that make sense?
Yep.
Okay. So I've got a question from one of our participants. This is from Victoria Lopez. She says, what are the plans for this summer? So we have right now planning an expansion of distance learning into the summer. Typically, Berkeley has offered a relatively small portfolio of summer learning opportunities. It's really focused on kids who participate during the school year in BEARS, or high school students who need to do credit recovery, or students with individualized education plans. We are planning to redirect some resources, essentially savings because of school closures, to offering an extended distance learning experience for students in the summer. We're going to first focus on students who fall in that category of unduplicated. That means that they're English language learners, or that they qualify for free and reduced lunch, or they're homeless or foster youth. And then we're soliciting from our teachers who would like to continue on with distance learning. We'll modify distance learning somewhat. In our summer program, we plan to feature 2 hours of live online instruction per day, 4 days per week. And then we're also expanding not only numerically the number of students who can participate this summer, but we plan to offer 2 sessions, a 4-week session beginning on June 22nd, and then a 3-week session that will take students all the way until the week prior to the opening of the school year. So we're also actively right now partnering with 2 outside organizations, one that would permit us to establish a tutoring program, high school tutors working with elementary age youth, and the other is exploring tentatively a partnership with a large science camp provider to be able to offer reductions in tuition price for what will likely be an online science camp from a well-known Bay Area provider. So that's currently the plan. I should probably address sort of last week's scuttlebutt about a July start. Gavin Newsom created quite a stir in California when he mused from the podium that schools might be able to reopen in July. I think we're getting really strong indications from public health officers that that simply isn't the case. You know, to wit, the LA County public health officer's decision to extend the shelter-in-place order till the end of July. But we're right now not planning to reopen our schools at scale in July, but are planning instead for our customary August start date. I'm going to continue on with just a couple of more documents. Can you share guidance documents links if they're available? Where can we get them? We will be sure to share the slide deck from tonight's town hall on our main page, the BUSD webpage. Inside of that slide deck are links to all of the documents that we've referenced, and in fact, many more. You'll find links to probably a dozen documents that are all relevant to COVID-19 and schools. And we do actively encourage you to check them out. Shirley asks a question about the status of Oxford Elementary's move to West Campus. There's been no interruption to our construction schedule on West Campus, which means that we are currently on schedule with that construction project. And we continue to plan to move the Oxford school community to West Campus for the coming school year. So again, there's been no interruption to those plans. That move continues to be active. And then I'm just going to try to find one more, and then perhaps, Natasha, we can do one more of our questions, and then I think it's probably time to begin wrapping up.
Okay.
Let's see, there's a question from an anonymous attendee that asks the question about looping at the elementary level. The idea of looping is that students would stay with the same teacher, move from 2nd grade into 3rd grade, but that the teacher stays on with the same group of students. This respondent is saying that a looping idea would be so valuable given the interruption in students' education. I do know from conversations with principals just today that these conversations about looping are active in our elementary schools. I have solicited from principals who are working with teachers a recommendation about this idea and others that would try to build more continuity in for students. Another idea that I'm hearing thrown around is that we might have a 1-month period of review at the beginning of the year just to address gaps that may have emerged because of all of this lost learning time. In that idea, students would actually be promoted to a new teacher, but then that new teacher would go back and make sure that all the students are brushed up on the previous year's content. Natasha, let's do one more from the thought exchange activity, and then I think it's time to start wrapping up.
Okay. Well, so let's see now. So people have continued to rate, and what's risen to the top has been actually some of the things that we've heard before, wanting to have a mix of distance and online learning, wanting to have small groups, wanting to offer help to teachers who are struggling with technology as well as PD, wanting to acknowledge the hard work that the teachers are doing. Yeah, I mean, that's clearly, that got a lot of support, and acknowledge that teachers are in many cases doing this in 2 languages. Information for parents must be translated for non-English speakers. That actually, I just got today a request for some additional assistance there. So our district translator is going to be working with other translators to establish a shared vocabulary so that we can have more volunteer translators. Teachers need support too. More time to plan. Here's a new one. Buddies to study with, peer supports, improving social support.
Those are great ideas. Again, what we plan to do is pass along all of this feedback, thought exchange. This platform allows us to slice and dice all of these responses and the ratings in a lot of different ways. We'll be passing along this collection of great ideas to our principals and to our educators, considering it ourselves. And then we'll also be able to share, I think, Natasha, some reports from all of this good thinking as part of what we make public about the town hall.
Yes, we can generate reports. Yep.
That's great. So with that, I'm going to grab your screen one last time, and we will bring our virtual town hall to a conclusion. So I want to say first, thank you. Really appreciate both all of the folks who joined us this evening for this 90-minute virtual town hall. I just feel such deep gratitude to our educators, our classified staff, our parents, and our students for their ongoing goodwill, generosity, patience, and perseverance in the face of this global crisis. There's been so many positive things taking place in our community. I wanted to highlight one of them that's coming up this week. The Berkeley Public Schools Fund will be hosting a book drive, essentially soliciting high quality, new or very gently used books from families. Families are welcome to come by, drop off paper bags of books to the new Ed Hub location, which is now at the Berkeley Adult School. You can find that just off of San Pablo, and you'll enter off of Curtis Street. Book donations, again, in paper bags only because of the virus, will be received starting on Monday, May 18th from 12 to 2 p.m. and will continue Monday, Wednesday, and Friday on the following schedule. Again, Mondays 12 to 2, Wednesdays 3:30 to 5:30, Fridays 12 to 2 p.m. After a week-long quarantine of these books, they'll be sorted and leveled and bagged, and then those books will be distributed by EdHub volunteers and staff to families who drop by the EdHub and who are wanting additional books at home. I want to call out a number of folks who also joined us in the audience section tonight. We had School Board Director Ty Alper, Vice President Ty Alper, thank you for being here. We were also joined by Beatrice Leva-Cutler, another one of our board members, and then a special call out on my behalf to Ann Caligari. Ann is our supervisor of OFE, the Office of Family Equity and Engagement, and she and her team are the ones doing much of the very supportive and sometimes heartbreaking work, listening so closely to families who are in need in Berkeley during this very difficult time. Again, to point out a little bit of what we'll make available on the deck, you will have links available if you access the deck to our full fall 2020 planning outline that will provide much more detail about both our engagement strategies and the sequence we envision following for our planning. And then you'll also have a link to the original distance learning plan that was meant to describe just the period from April to June, the fourth quarter of this year. Also available in the deck will be a rich set of resources, very recently curated resources from a variety of organizations that relate directly to the fall of 2020 and the eventual planned use of our school facilities. So for folks who are wanting additional information from a variety of organizations about how to safely reopen schools, here you have a variety of links. So with that, I want to offer my final thanks to every single one of you. We really appreciate your presence this evening, your good thinking. Please know that we continue to be deeply committed to your students and their learning, and that we know that we've got a path to travel together as a community. We're committed to being good partners, to learning together with you, and to doing everything we can to make it through this crisis. So again, thank you very much. My colleagues, thank you, and please have a safe and good evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.